welcome back.
Hello.
This is Bad Marriages in the Bible, and I am your host, Sean, along with
Kate,
my wife. So we are married, and we love to look at marriages in Scripture because they do a great job of highlighting our pain and our brokenness and our inability to love as we should. And because the Bible is just full of broken, normal people like you and me, and we love to see the Lord's redemption in those places. So that's what we're doing.
And the redemption is so great that there's great joy, celebration.
Right. It's also great joy,
pleasure, and satisfaction, and it's better than it was before on the other side of his redemption.
There you go. There you go. Keeping it positive. But
there is good news.
There is good news. That's what we're about at Dandelion Ministries. We want to share the good news of Jesus Christ in your place of need, and we do that through creative means, and this podcast being one of them. We love to use art, as we talked about. We've talked about many, many times on this podcast, to get around our logical, rational defenses and to connect with our real place, where we're really hurting, or where we're really not sure, or where we're really just desperate for somebody to say that they love us and that they will be with us no matter what. And so we want you to hear that through this podcast, through the Scripture, because that is what God is saying to you, Jesus, through his son Jesus, that he is for you. And we have been walking through the Bible, and we've made our way up to Ezra and Nehemiah, which go together. When people say that, often Christians or in church, perhaps you might hear somebody say Ezra and Nehemiah. They don't rarely hear about just Ezra or just Nehemiah.
People talk about Nehemiah a lot because they like to copy his leadership strategies.
Yeah, if you go to a leadership something or other that's Christian oriented, you'll hear about Nehemiah, and you'll leave completely unhelped.
You got to make sure to remember the last chapter in Nehemiah where he goes a bit nuts.
He goes a little nuts. And anyway, the Bible is not, we've said this also, but it bears repeating now, which, there are two sermons. I'm just going to say this too.
Yes.
There are two sermons in the world. And if you have been listening to our podcast for longer than one episode, then you will probably have noticed there's repeating themes. And it's because there are really only two sermons in the world. And one is that it is all up to you. That there's, there are things in life that you're supposed to be doing, and you're not doing them right enough or well enough. And so you need to work harder and do those things.
I might say, God will help you here and there, but really the bottom line is this is what you need to do. You need to do these things.
Yeah. If God features at all in the sermon, it's that he is the one who's disappointed in you for not doing it. And two, that he might be kind enough and, to give you a pass this time, but he really wants you to try harder. That's generally that's one sermon. And oftentimes the world is preaching that sermon all the time. I mean, that is what the world is preaching to us all the time. They just don't always use God. It's just, you'll hear it in the Beatles, all you need is love. Or you'll hear it in, you'll see it in art, you'll see it all over the place. Whereas the message, you'll certainly hear it in politics, that we're just not doing it right. If we just did X, Y, and Z, then our country would be perfect, and then the world would be better if we just preserved the environment the way that we should, or if we just stopped, killing the baby orcas or whatever. Find your thing.
This is where the world of parenting lives,
all the time.
This is where it lives. All the things that you should be doing, teaching. All the stuff you should be doing.
That's all the stuff you should be doing.
And what you are doing is not good enough.
Right.
It's pretty bad.
That's right. And so that's the first sermon. And it is the world majors in it. And
it's all the world has.
It's all the world knows what to do, because you're left with yourself. And it is our default setting. We think that it's all up to us. And the second sermon that is out there, that is actually the right one, is one that says that it is not up to you. It is up to God, and God has actually done something to save you. That he has actually sent his son Jesus, and he has actually taken your sin, your inability to love, or your inability to save the environment, or your inability to be a good Republican or a good Democrat, or your inability to save, baby seals. whatever it is. I mean, pick your marine animal. Like, we are killing them all the time. It's terrible. I just read an article recently in the New York Times about this great Lego spill that happened.
I was just thinking, it's all of our plastic.
It's our plastics. So we're going to have a little aside here. This is an aside to my aside. And that is, there was a huge container ship that was coming from the Netherlands, because that's where the Legos are made. The interlocking bricks. There's a whole documentary, I think, on Netflix about them, which I love Legos. I grew up with Legos and I love them. But anyway, this ship was carrying the Legos to us in the United States, and it was hit by a rogue wave just outside of the English Channel and lost all its containers. And one of them was full of Legos. And so there's actually a Facebook group on finding Lego, which they say Lego, the plural is Lego. Did you know that? I know. I say Legos. I'm an uneducated American, but in this article, they kept saying Lego as the plural and singular. So that's a mind blow for you. Anyway, but there's a whole Facebook page on where the Legos have been washed up to on shore all over the British Isles and like northern France.
Wow. And
it was just a fascinating article, but it was talking about how this is what we've done to our oceans. They're just full of plastic. So there you go.
We're gonna. That's a really great aside and makes me sad. But should you?
I'm taking us back to the real thing.
Go for it.
That was Kate's gentle way of saying, "Shut up, Sean."
No.
Move back to the point.
I was going to, but then I was like, well, maybe he's about to. So
no. So point is that the second sermon is the one that says Jesus has actually been enough for you. He has actually fulfilled the law for you. That's the first sermon is all about law, what you should be doing and what you're not doing. And the second sermon is all about grace and Jesus' love and mercy for you. And so these are the two things.
They are.
That's it.
And that is what we see, just to bring it into marriage.
Yeah.
There will be a point in your marriage where you realize that you have sinned against your partner, against God, and you can't fix it. You can't stop it. It is something that is
you can't take it back.
You can't take it back.
Like it's been done, and the pain is there.
And the pain, and you can see it on your partner's face. And so there's collateral damage, and can't take it back. And maybe it's something that's reoccurring too.
It's the cry of Coldplay, which we all love. We love Coldplay, and it's Fix You, and we love you. We love Fix You, except it's that you can't do it.
I know.
And he got divorced. It's so sad. We all love Chris Martin.
I do.
And he couldn't fix it.
I know.
Anyway, so there you go.
So
you will want to fix it, but you won't be able to.
Yes. And when that happens, hear Kate and Sean be like, ooh, you are on holy ground. Now God has brought you to a place where you are going to be banking on him to make his promise that Jesus has really forgiven and absolved you of this guilt, and that he is alive and at work in your heart, and he can bring redemption and reconciliation and new life out of this place of death and desolation. And that is what you're in it. You're in it right there. You're in the grave and you're waiting for that resurrection. And when he does it, and he's done it through us so many times. I mean, so many times.
It's a story of our lives.
Yeah. That will become a testimony, and it will bring you and your spouse closer together than ever before. And that is where intimacy is born, is in that forgiving moment, in that reconciling moment. And you are going to hate what brought you into that place more than you ever have when you've been forgiven of it. Not when you've been shamed and cast out and, canceled or condemned for it. That will not bring about a change of heart. The forgiveness will. So and that's only what Jesus can do. So that's where what you have just said, the better sermon of what Jesus has done, gets real in marriage.
Yeah. And so that was the reason I'm remembering why we got there is because of Nehemiah and people telling you to be like Nehemiah. That's what you'll often hear. You go to a leadership thing and they'll say, be like Nehemiah. That is the sermon that's saying it's all up to you. Be like him. The reality is that Nehemiah was desperate for grace too. And all of us are. That's why Scripture ultimately is a testimony of people who cannot keep the law. And that is what Nehemiah's book is about.
Yeah, it is.
And are desperate for something else, another word. And these are the other ways we talk about this, the 2 words, 2 sermons, 2 words, the first word being the law. It's the demand. It's the thing that you can't do, but you're supposed to do. And if you did, everything would be better, but you're not doing it. And so you need a better word. And the better word is Jesus, that God has done it for you. And that's what we're going to see here in Nehemiah. We started last week with Ezra. Kate helped us understand the narrative of the Kings and Chronicles, and got us here to where we heard Ezra. They've returned from exile. The Jews, they've been desperate to do this. When they get back, you can even see it in these stories with Ezra and Nehemiah. The Jews who were old enough to remember and who were taken away from the land, because there's like a whole new generation that was born in exile in Persia and in Assyria. And the old folks, when they get back to the land, just like weep. They're like, because they're just, they can't believe it. They were desperate to be brought back to their land. Their land is so central to the promise that God gave them to Abraham. And so now here they are, and you'd think that they'd be that they would have learned their lesson. They can't, this is totally unfair, and I apologize to anybody who's listening to this that's a descendant of Israel, but it was their big time out, right? I mean, they were sent into time out for what they did, and they had their toy taken away. I mean, you guys know you remember that when you're fighting with your sibling over some toy, and your mom was just like, I'm going to take them away. It's one of the themes in the Lego movie. We're back to Legos. And, it's going to be put into what was it? I forget the...
the bin of no return.
Yeah, the bin thing. All these funny names. Anyway. And so that's what happened. So you'd think that that's what we do. Our natural answer is like, oh, we're just going to punish them and we're going to take the thing away, and that will correct the behavior and modify the behavior. But what we see is...
the behavior's in the heart.
The behavior's in the heart. They actually need a heart change. They come back and they immediately start intermarrying with the tribes were foreign tribes and that worshipped other gods. And it's something that God is very clear that you do not do. Don't do this, because it's going to actually lead you into idolatry. You're going to start worshiping their gods too. And they immediately start doing it. Ezra comes back and they've already done it.
Yeah. And
they say, okay, now I guess we have to put away our wives. That's the other part that happens, as we talked about last time, the collateral damage. These poor women who you brought into your life and married and then had kids with, now they get the short end of that stick.
They do. And if you want to see how God takes care of those women and children, I mean, certainly they did suffer. The story of Hagar, when God comes to her on the brink of death, when Ishmael's about to die, because Abraham has sent her away because he's convicted that this was not the way that God's promise for his son was supposed to happen. He sends her away, and they're about to die, and she's like, I can't watch my son die. And the angel of the Lord comes to her and gives her a promise. I'm going to take care of you. And she praises God and says, surely he's the God who sees me. So that's the hope for victims.
Of our sin.
Of our sin. Exactly. Here's the God who sees me and who's taking care of me. So Nehemiah picks up on this situation with Ezra. And so if you flip to Nehemiah chapter 8, it summarizes how Ezra was like, we need to be faithful to the law. And he reads the Old Testament and all of its commandments that Moses had given, the 10 Commandments, surely, but also all of the purity laws about ways to be set apart from the other nations so that they could worship God, all the ways to worship him in the temple to atone for their sins, all the food restrictions, to be set apart, to be different so you don't get swept away in idolatry. He reads that, and you can kind of see that as what Ezra 9 and 10 is about to do. It's like remembering oh, that's what we were supposed to do, but we've done this in our marriages.
Mm.
And so they feel deeply convicted.
Yeah, all of Israel starts weeping.
I mean, imagine that. Like the whole nation.
All of the people start crying.
And that is a miracle when that happens, when you feel deeply convicted, about like that wasn't the right way.
The self-defense mechanism has been stopped. It's been silenced, right? I mean, because that's our knee-jerk reaction. It's like my story last week with the lawnmower guy. Like my first inclination is defend myself, justify myself, point the finger at somebody else and say like, well, look at them. They were worse. I mean, just any of you have kids or were ever a kid, you remember this with your siblings or your friends, when you got in a fight over something. It's like, well, he did it first. He pinched me. And so then I hit him with the toy, like it was the logical thing to do. But we defend ourselves. And when the law has done its work, which it needs to be, that's those two words. You need to hear the word of the law to get to the gospel because you don't think you need Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
None of us do.
No.
None of us. I mean, that's what the psalmist says and what Paul highlights in Romans 3, that none of us are seeking after God. We all think we're fine. We're all on our, self-improvement track and doing whatever we can to prove that we're great. And the world trades in that currency. I mean, that's how the world works. It's all about performance. And, my favorite line from Janet Jackson, what have you done for me lately? Like that's what we want. So like, this is what we think. And the world operates that way. So we think, well, that's obviously the way it is. We think God operates that way too. But the law was not given for you to perform. It was given to show your lack of performance. And so you need to hear that. And you need to have that part of you, which I was like, that's not even accurate. It's just you, the sinner in you. You need to have that silenced.
Break down the defenses, break through the denial.
Yeah, there's no more effort here. You got to be brought to the end of your rope
to get to that vulnerable place of real need. And that's where God, who is the lover, who is jealous after each one of us, because he is real love. He is real freedom. He is real intimacy. And he won't stop. He'll go after, he'll break down all of those defenses, all of those things that we're justifying ourselves in order to meet us in the place where we're really in need.
To give us the thing we're desperate for.
Yes. To give us that forgiveness. To give us that real love.
It's the image, which I think I've shared before, but it's the image of the child that's, been frustrated or hurt or something. Like one of our daughters does this all the time. She'll hurt herself accidentally, fall or trip or whatever. And you're like, are you okay? And she's like, yes, I'm fine. And she gets really rigid and doesn't want you to help her. Like kind of resists.
I used to do that.
And it's just like, no, I'm fine. And doesn't even, in a way, doesn't want the attention at that moment. There's a whole mix of things going on in her, I'm sure. Shame, embarrassment, whatever. But the reality is, you just wait for a second and she's going to start crying. And she's desperate for you to pick her up. Really, the real thing she needs is for you to pick her up and to love her and to hold her and to just say, that must hurt so bad. I know. And I'll give you a kiss on the boo-boo. Like that kind of thing. And that's what's really going on. I mean, it's that picture of the child that's pushing away as hard as it can, and in some sort of delusional thing of thinking that this is what I need. I need to be somehow self-sufficient in this moment. But I'm really actually hurt and desperate. And I just want you to keep pulling me in closer. And you eventually break, and you give in. And then what you really do is you fall apart in the arms of the one who is loving you and holding on to you.
That is the best thing ever.
It is. It's like, you're like, oh, this is I can't believe it. This is actually true right now too.
Yeah.
Like that somebody's here with me.
Somebody's here with me. There's a love that's deeper than my deserving. So what Nehemiah and Ezra are showing is that they did not deserve God's rescue.
No.
They did not deserve him to make them a nation, a glorious nation in the first place. They did not deserve for him to bring them out of slavery, out of captivity, and to restore them. They didn't deserve any of it. And in fact, they took it for granted and took advantage the whole time. And here he is convicting to bring them to that place of real need, because they're all basically carrying around imposter syndrome of like, oh no, we're great, we're special. And then they're like terribly worried about being guilty and, doing the same things, if not worse. That's what God convicts them of. You're worse than your neighbors, actually. The way you treat the poor amounts to you, and the way you treat your wives, you're worse. So they're guilty, and they need a better word. They need one of forgiveness, and that's what we see in Nehemiah right here. They're all weeping, realizing that they are guilty. The 12 steps talks about that ruthless honesty, bringing you to the place where you see that you cannot help yourself.
Step 1, we admitted we were powerless.
And that we could not help ourselves. And so they have been brought to that place, and they realize what they've done again, and that they need God to be that merciful God who loves them, and to do for them what they cannot do themselves.
Yeah.
And so then Nehemiah and Ezra are like, well, let's remember God's promises. Like, this is too much for us. We cannot stand underneath this conviction. And so they go and celebrate the Feast of Booths in order to remember when they were wandering around in the wilderness after God had rescued them out of slavery. He did take care of them for 40 years. He provided food and water every day. Bread and meat.
And their clothes didn't wear out, it says, and their ankles didn't swell. Their feet didn't swell. It's like, that by itself is impressive. You get to a place where you're like, those are just showing God's amazing provision and the fact that he meets your needs.
And they grumbled and they pushed away, and they were, all the same. But he was faithful to them because he can't be faithless. He was faithful because that's who he is. And it witnessed to them what real love, what real faithfulness, what real compassion, what real steadfast love is. They were so blessed by being loved by God that way. And that is what marriage is intended to be a sign of, for a husband and a wife too. And so they do that celebration of the Feast of Booths to remember his promises. And that same God is here with them now and has a word of forgiveness. And this is only just a taste of what Jesus would bring.
Yeah, it's the better word, right? Better than Ezra. You guys remember that band from the early 90s? If you don't, go look them up. The famous song called Good. And, but yeah, this is what this is all pointing to. This is what the Old Testament is driving us to. And it's what all the prophets were doing. And it's, which Ezra is. And we'll see it as we get into the prophets, the majors and the minor prophets after this. We're just going to see that this was the overall message, that Jesus has actually come for you. He's got something better, that he is faithful, and that his love is transformative. And it is, like Kate's saying, it's what we need in marriage. It's what we need in all of our primary relationships, and even our secondary ones, as I illustrated with my encounter with the lawnmower man last episode. If you want to hear that story, go back and listen to it. And we need it. We need a word from outside of ourselves. Marriage is something, and your relationship with your parents, your relationship with your siblings, your relationships with your boss, your coworkers. Something's going to happen if you interact with them at all. That's what a mentor of ours used to say: get more than two or more people together, and you're going to experience sin. Like, there will be conflict. There will be conflict. And we do it all the time. And, it's another phrase that we love to cite from the recovery rooms of the 12 steps, is that our best thinking got us here. And it's because we're trying. That's the thing. We're trying hard, and we keep screwing it up. And so we need a word from outside of ourselves. Nobody gets into a marriage thinking, I can't wait for this to blow up in my face and for my selfishness for my selfishness to be like devastating to this person, or vice versa. Like no one does that. And you get into relationships, especially romantic ones, because you're like, I really want to feel deeply connected to this person, and I really want them to love me badly, and I want to love someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have that X factor of being really attracted.
Yeah, and there's hopefully, yes, and there's something in there that it's just, it is illogical, and it is not something that is rationally done most of the time. And but then you find yourself in places of pain where you've not loved them the way that they need it and the way that you wanted to, and vice versa. And so we need that word from outside that actually tells us there's a power greater than this. That there is a real love that cannot be broken. And there's a real love that actually is more powerful than our pain and more powerful than our failures. And that love from the Lord is the thing that actually makes reconciliation possible for us in a marriage, in any relationship, because it leads us into a place of forgiveness, as we've said, these two words working on us. It leads us to a place where we stop trying to defend our territory or stop trying to justify, and instead we start saying, I'm sorry. And you can't do that. Well, you can. I'll say this. You won't say the words I'm sorry to somebody if you think they're going to just beat you up for it. Right? And I hesitated there for a moment because I was thinking, one of the other beautiful parts of recovery is you walk through forgiveness. That's what the 12 steps are. If you don't know, they're worth a read. Go check them out. But it's, as one of our mentors used to say, it's forgiveness, paint by numbers forgiveness. It's like, you don't have to do any thinking here. Just do these things, follow these steps, and you will have walked through forgiveness. And one of the main steps is that you actually write down all the things you've got that you're struggling with, and then you move towards a place of wanting to make amends with somebody. And the process of getting there is realizing that you actually have been forgiven for it already. And sometimes in our horizontal relationships, our relationships with other people, we're not sure how we're going to be received. And the self-protection instinct overrules in those moments, which on some level it should, because you don't want to be blown up or hurt, right? And but the thing that's so incredible about the gospel is that no matter what happens with anybody on earth, any of your horizontal relationships, there is the one, God himself and his son Jesus, that always forgives. And so you always have that as your narrative. That's what recovery is built on, is the fact that I have totally screwed the pooch when it comes to like in my world. I've gotten addicted to something to try to cope with my pain, and I've hurt everybody around me, which is what we talked about last week with Ezra ending, saying they even had children. There's a lot of collateral damage because of my choices and my brokenness. And no matter how I'm received by everybody around me, there is a word from outside of me, from Jesus, that says, I know. That's what the whole Old Testament is. It's God saying, I know. Like, no. You're in denial and you're trying to run over here and do this, that, and the other. And he just keeps pushing and saying, no, I know the real story. And Jesus does that too. That's his Sermon on the Mount. Everybody thinks the Sermon on the Mount is this thing that we're supposed to, it's like Jesus' instructions to us to go do. It's actually just the law. It's Jesus bringing it hard and heavy. And he's like, no, I know the situation. I know what's going on inside. And he's saying that, I know, and I forgive you. That's when Jesus comes on the scene, and he just keeps on giving everybody mercy, and everybody freaks out about it. That's what gets him killed, is because we actually don't think that should be. We think we're supposed to earn it and prove ourselves. But he comes and says, I know the dirt, I know everything, the darkness, and I forgive you for it. And that word is the thing that allows you to start saying, I'm sorry to the people in your life, because you're okay.
Mm.
He actually has made it safe for you to own the truth. And so then you can actually go, and no matter what their response is, you can begin to make amends. They may hate you. It may blow up in your face, but you know that you've got a safe place in the Lord. And that is the hope. It's a risk in marriage. It's one of those things about marriage that's so vulnerable because you're going to confess things that are just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. This is the person that matters to me more than anybody else on earth. And I have hurt them.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't believe I have to admit that. I hate that. I wish it wasn't true. And there is this fear of being rejected and hurt. But you have this bigger word, this better word from Jesus. It says, I know, and I love you, and it's okay. And you can take the risk and say, I'm sorry. And that is the only hope that we have in our marriages. Both sides. No matter what it is. Like, I need to know that I am okay in him if I'm ever going to actually walk in reconciliation and repentance with you.
Absolutely. And you've got the God of heaven who's not condemning you, but who is for you. And the fact that you or me, want to make amends is fruit of how deep that forgiveness is.
Yeah.
And it's like badass too, because you're willing to risk the rejection. But it's worth it. It's worth it for your own sake, for your own self-worth, because you see how much Jesus cleans house. When he convicts, when he brings something to light, you see that wasn't of him. It was actually bad for me. If it's not worshiping him and it's not from faith in him, then it's going to actually be bad for you too, personally. It's going to, make life more complicated, add shame, add, all sorts of secrets and vows, and you're going to start, feeling really heavy and full of shame. So when he brings to light, and then you start not wanting to do that anymore.
Right.
And his forgiveness goes so deep that you're willing to risk getting rejected by your partner, but it's for your own sake that it's better to share that, and to ask for forgiveness, and that you want that kind of repair and reconciliation with your spouse. And so that's how deep Jesus's forgiveness cleans house, that he goes to that very vulnerable place of the thing that you're afraid to admit to yourself or to somebody else. That's where he goes. And when that begins to happen for a couple, we were so reticent to want to share. We didn't even realize what the real driving motives were.
Most of the time you don't realize it.
Most of the time you're in denial.
Like, I'm reacting to this. I don't know why, but you're driving me crazy.
Exactly. You're just living reaction. But he gets you still, and he will probably use your spouse or some kind of conflict, or, maybe a word from the outside friend, but any of it will be some form of conviction that you see yourself and you get really still. And you start seeing the sin for what it is, and you can name it, and you don't want it anymore. That's the miracle. You don't want it anymore. Well, and, even if you live a life with struggling with it, you're at least naming it for what it is and receiving forgiveness, and in dialogue with your spouse about the best ways to manage and support each other.
Yeah, well, it's also it's what you want, and ultimately anyway, and you don't have it. That's the thing. Like, we convince ourselves in the name of peace, what we think is peace, or not conflict, that it's better. It's oftentimes just better not to say anything, or I'm just going to keep, I'm just going to try to muscle it through myself and kind of white knuckle it, or whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is it already has affected your relationship. You're already not in a place of vulnerability. You're already, like you said, living with secrets, or living with an edited version of yourself. And that is not ultimately what we all are desperate for. What we're all desperate for is to be known fully, and to have somebody love us fully, knowing us. And that means all of you. That means warts and all. That means all the pain, all the inability, all the fear, all the weakness, all of that. That's actually what we want. And that is what the image of marriage is it it is pointing to that relationship with God.
Mm.
And every so once in a while it happens in marriage. You actually get to experience it, right? I mean, like, this is the thing. We're all desperate for it. Unfortunately, so many of us haven't had the resources or the support to get there.
Mm.
But it is possible. And that is the beautiful thing, is that taking that risk, stepping out in that way, the Lord pushing in that way for us to do that is actually the thing that brings us to the place we always wanted to be, which was to be truly vulnerable, truly open, truly known, and to have somebody love us there and stay with us.
That's right.
And that is what you get. What you had before, the kind of jockeying, the, trying to put your best foot forward, all that kind of stuff is from a place of insecurity. And it's what the world
It's exhausting.
works in. Yeah. And it's horrible and it's hard. And that's why so many marriages end in flames. And, but the thing that the Lord brings us into when he is actually at work in our marriage and in our lives, he brings us into a place of actual security. It's a place of vulnerability and you're actually secure.
That's right. And that's the sermon he's preaching to you today. Not that it's on your shoulders and you need to try harder, but that he has entered into the pain that you might be dealing with your spouse. And he understands where you have, quote unquote, intermarried with a foreign wife.
Right. You've got other idols.
Where you've done what Ezra, the folks back there have done. Welcome to the club. We have a God who knows those things. They're not surprising to him. That's why he nailed them with himself on the cross. And he's actually stronger. His forgiveness is stronger. And he's come to meet you in that vulnerable spot and to forgive and love. He is your primary, faithful one. And he has a way of forgiveness and of freedom. And it'll be a much greater intimacy with your spouse. He's got that way for you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're so glad you guys were with us today. We are, as always, Dandelion Ministries, and you can find stuff in the show notes. My email, if you want to send us questions and or prayer needs, you can check out our website there, and you can support us if you want to support the show. Everything we do is enabled by generous givers and people that support our ministry. So we would welcome you to do that. If you want, give us a review on the Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you're listening to, and share it with your friends and family, because we all need to hear this message again every day. So we hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.